Record. Spotlight. Sarah, you're in Spotlight.
Okay, great. So welcome everyone. Jacob Mulligan will be giving a talk on data warehouse design for startups. Jacob leads the analytics and data infrastructure at Firefly. He's involved in setting up Snowflake, Looker, dbt, and FiveTran, as well as operating as the company's primary analyst. Prior to Firefly, he was at PillPack, which was acquired by Amazon. And he joined the team at PillPack as their first team member and as the first employee and engineer. He helped build PillPack's patient-facing web apps as a front-end engineer before moving on to full-stack development, supporting pharmacy operations, and then ultimately joining the data team. So we're very happy to have Jacob here to give a talk on data warehouse design at startups. So thank you.
Great, thank you for having me. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so let me get myself situated again. All right, you already know half the intro, so thank you for that. Just to talk very briefly about the company I'm at and kind of some context that will come into play in a few slides is that I work for Firefly. We are a value-based, kind of team-based, digital-first primary care startup. We're about 50 people, and when I joined the team about a year and a half ago, there was about 10 of us. As you might be able to infer from the slide, with Firefly, you can chat with your clinicians right in our app, and you have access to primary care providers and social workers and nutritionists. So one of the things that I enjoy about working in this environment as an analyst is having kind of these clinicians as coworkers. We are hiring. If any of you are have experience working with medical claims data, feel free to reach out. I've linked to the JD here, and my email is just jacob@firefly.health. All right, and with that, I want to start off by saying this is purposefully not a big data talk. For me, when I was starting out and kind of as I was thinking about this presentation, I'm not designing this for designing systems at Firefly or prior to this at PillPack for Giant Tech Co. A lot of the data that I'm working with, and maybe many of you are working with, is in the megabytes or gigabyte size. This maybe we're on smaller teams with fewer resources. And when I was thinking about kind of my goals in building out the analytics team infrastructure at Firefly, I was focused on kind of tooling and kind of organizational design that allowed us to focus on insights and spend less time kind of supporting the infrastructure, so that I could, again, spend most of my time working with business partners across the business to answer questions. So I'm going to talk about kind of maybe what life without a warehouse or some of these tools around the warehouse are kind of were like for me, or potentially are like for some of you. And I want to talk a little bit about kind of the tools that sit around a data warehouse. This was maybe not immediately obvious to me when I got started, that there's actually like a bunch of other tools around a data warehouse that are really important to be able to get value out of having a data warehouse. And I then want to ground kind of these like kind of high level, these topics in kind of the reality of how the last year and a half has played out for us at Firefly in our journey in building out our analytics and data system. So maybe you don't have a warehouse or a data warehouse. The data scientist, this might be, this might be a Jupyter notebook where you're importing CSVs into a data frame and taking screenshots of your notebook and sharing it with folks, or it's the analyst with a BI tool connected directly to the prod database, where you're working out of spreadsheets. Some other problems that we ran into kind of prior to getting set up with the tools we have today is There was no single source of truth for how we calculate certain metrics. The way that we transformed data and importantly tested our data pipelines, we just didn't have great tooling for. And maybe the biggest one is that we didn't have tools for joining together a bunch of different data sources. We had our EMR that our clinicians use. We have the mobile app that our patients use. We have Google Ads and Salesforce and all these other tools. We wanted to join all that data together. And the last one, this might just be me, but running kind of prod analyses from a Jupyter notebook on my local computer. Kind of all things that were working well for us when we were 10 people less, and it has evolved for us. So I want to start by talking about, well, yeah, I already said this a little bit, but yeah, the data warehouse alone, it's not the magic bullet. I want to talk about kind of the tools around a data warehouse to just at least be aware of, and talk about some of the kind of concerns for each of them or considerations. So, first one is, how are you getting data into your data warehouse? 5 years ago, maybe, kind of prior to things like Stitch and FiveTran, and the tooling has come a long way to help with this. So there are these great tools called like FiveTran and Stitch that will just automatically pull data from your prod database or from Google Analytics, and hundreds of sources, and load it into Snowflake in a way that or Redshift or BigQuery, and do that for you. In a prior life, I had written code that did this, and I linked to an article at the very end of this deck that talks about how engineers should no longer be writing ETL software. Second one is, how are you transforming your data? So this for me, kind of prior to Firefly, was Airflow. But the key question or consideration here is, okay, so you have a bunch of raw data now that's been loaded into your data warehouse. How are you going to kind of model that raw data to in a way that is going to be then useful for you as an analyst to help you answer questions about the business or the research that you're working on? And then there's actual how are you housing the data? And I've got some more on this later, but what I'll say now is that there's a interesting kind of broad landscape of options here. There's some, there's Snowflake, there's things like Redshift and BigQuery where Snowflake actually just sits on top of those and has just a bunch of features on top of those two data stores. And then there are things like Databricks on the other end of the spectrum, where these are kind of that's kind of an all-in-one solution. It has, it can do data loading for you. It can do data transformations. It has some visualization capabilities. Snowflake is actually starting to do some visualization in their web UI as well. And then the last piece here is visualization. And like for many of the folks on this call whose titles might be data scientists, this for you might actually mean there's no tool that you need. You might just still be using a Jupyter or R to perform an analysis, but you're pulling data from your data warehouse. But some other options to consider are things like Looker or Periscope or Tableau. All right, so all of that, there's a lot there. I want to now talk through like where might you start. Let's say you're joining a new startup as kind of their first analyst, or you're one of a couple analysts on a team. I'm going to talk through how kind of the journey that we have taken at Firefly in our evolution from using spreadsheets to where we are today. So for us, when we first started out, we didn't have a ton of money, ton of people, we didn't have a ton of data, but we were really motivated to analyze the data that we had and to start getting insights out of the data that we had. And we started actually not with the data warehouse, and instead further up, kind of further downstream with just a data visualization tool. And in our case, we just connected Looker directly to our production database and to our prod kind of electronic medical record database. Fairly quickly, I started getting questions from folks across the business about how is marketing performing? Can you give us an insight into like where our marketing dollars are going? Or can you join together some data between our production database and our medical record software to answer a question that spans these two data sources? And I think like that specific point is the one that drives a lot of people to get to build out some sort of data warehouse where they want to cross-join data from a variety of different sources. And so fast forward 6 months, we now have some more data, we've raised some money, and we have some real patients signed up. And we needed a place to store that data, and we also needed a way to get the data out of all these different sources and into Snowflake, which is what we ended up deciding to go with. But like a key consideration at the time was that we knew we weren't going to hire another analyst for probably maybe a year, maybe 9 months. And we wanted the focus of my time as the only analyst at the time to be on delivering insights and operating as an analyst versus kind of operating as a data engineer, getting data at a bunch of different places and loaded into our data warehouse. So this brings us to kind of about month 6 of what our data kind of diagram looks like. So here, we have Snowflake's in the picture now. We are still using something called FiveTran for replicating data from a bunch of different sources and writing it into Snowflake for us. There are a few tools like this. Between FiveTran and Snowflake, like I spend very little of my time anymore maintaining these systems. A question I was asked in the breakout room before this is like, how much time do I spend as an analyst versus kind of supporting infrastructure? And at this point, it's mostly a self-running machine. One of the things that I love about Snowflake is that like it scales up and down when you need it to. If you need to, if our marketing team comes to me and says, hey, we have this other data source, can you get this into Looker for me? With FiveTran, it's almost always turnkey to just get data out of the different additional data sources loaded into Snowflake. And at this time, for quite a while, I had a EC2 little micro server that had a cron tab and some Jupyter notebooks that were connected directly to Snowflake and was writing and reading and writing data right back into this raw database in Snowflake. And I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but we ended up replacing that. And yeah, so I want to just talk a bit more about kind of these Snowflake decisions specifically. A metaphor I read about Snowflake on a blog post it's some time ago is that it's like using Uber to get everywhere. It's a bit more expensive, but it's a lot easier than owning a car. And now, after having been using it for a year, that really rings true for me. Every part of that. It's really easy to maintain. Before this, I was using Redshift, and it got the job done. But as a data team, we certainly spent more time kind of fine-tuning the way that Redshift worked. And Snowflake has this really novel this concept of warehouses where different users that are connecting to Snowflake can connect using different warehouses, which you can size up to gigantic and super fast to really small and cheap and maybe a bit slower. But the other benefit of that is that it's really easy to understand what's driving costs. So if any of you on the call are also kind of the decision makers for Snowflake versus Redshift, you know the feeling of someone coming to you and asking why your bill increased, and I certainly have been in these shoes, and I appreciate that with Snowflake, it is quite easy to kind of understand in a given day or week or month exactly what drove up or drove down cost. Another feature that Snowflake has that is it has been really convenient for anyone that might be sharing data with folks kind of outside of your organization is they simply called it the data share feature, where you can really easily kind of create a user in your database and grant access to a really specific, tightly controlled part of a set of data in your database to folks outside your organization. They also have these open and free data sets. So just a few examples are getting weather by zip code, COVID cases by zip code, and it's pretty much just a click of a button and you have these huge, reliable, real-time data sets available at your fingertips. And you can immediately dive into analysis versus kind of spending time getting it into your data system. For other things, there's just great documentation. There's tons of kind of added on features that make it really convenient. If you accidentally drop a table, you can literally just write undrop table name, and then it's back. I've never had to use it, but it makes me sleep better at night knowing it's there. And like one thing that I heard a lot when I was making the kind of go no go decision with Snowflake some time ago was it's less configurable, and I would say, like, at least theoretically, like I have yet to run into a problem where I've not been able to configure Snowflake to work for me. But it is true that with Redshift or BigQuery, like you were just closer to the bare metal. But for the system and constraints that Firefly is operating in, it's been very convenient to have a mostly turnkey solution. And one thing I'll note is that we are not using Snowflake as our application database. So like we have a separate Postgres database that our patient-facing app runs off of. Something else to consider is that people do use Snowflake as their actual application production database. There are some pros and cons to that. I don't have experience with doing that. We don't do that here at Firefly, but it's something to think about if you're really starting from scratch. All right, so then now fast forward again 12 months. This brings us to basically 2 months ago. We started to want to kind of model our data directly in Snowflake in kind of more novel ways. We wanted to kind of have many layers in a imagined a kind of DAG that builds up from a bunch of different objects and creates kind of value-added data sets. And I had been using, like I said, this kind of EC2 server with Python scripts running on a cron tab, and it sure was kind of cheap and easy to get up and running. But at this point, I knew that the data team at Firefly was going to be growing. There's now 3 of us, and I wanted to bring on board some tooling to handle and support our kind of transformation step to scale with us a bit better, to give us the ability to test our transformation steps. It was also a priority of mine to have a tool that allowed analysts to also be their own data engineers. Anyone that's familiar with SQL, I wanted kind of analysts that were already familiar with SQL to be able to use SQL to kind of build up their data pipelines and their data models, and at least not yet, create a separate team that was just responsible for data engineering or analytics engineering. And that brings us to some subtle changes in here, but this kind of orange box at the bottom here, the transform step, is no longer a kind of EC2 instance that only I really understood that was running a bunch of Python scripts. We now use something called DBT, which anyone that's kind of that needs to be doing kind of data engineering work, I highly recommend it. We really like it so far. It lets you build out kind of data pipelines and kind of transform and model data, all just using SQL select statements. And something else that we did that probably could have done, should have done a while ago, is have a separate analytics database in our Snowflake environment. This is a pretty simple one. Something that we have always been good about is having kind of a separation between raw data and kind of analytics, kind of value-added data sets. But you know, this really clear separation makes it clear to the analysts on my team, and then any engineer inside of Firefly that might be that are doing analyses with our data. It makes it really clear to them kind of what the source of truth is for different data sets. So just to kind of step back and kind of see all that at a high level, like here's kind of the overview of the journey we've taken. Shortly after I joined, we brought on Looker and Jupyter Notebook, connecting directly to the prod database. 10 people, 2 data sources, 1 analyst. And about 6 months later, we brought on and kind of extract and load tool, which is FiveTran, and a warehousing solution, which is Snowflake. And most recently, about 2 months ago, we added DBT to our stack. And also just wanted to highlight kind of a few kind of constraints of this setup. As I was thinking about this just before the presentation today, you know, we want one constraint that has not that has raised kind of 1 or 2 problems for us is that we aren't able to get like true real-time data into Snowflake. This is a constraint with these kind of extract and load tools like FiveTran and Stitch. So the fastest we can get data into our data warehouse is every 5 minutes. That said, like there's like truly only one use case that we have really for needing data more frequently than that, and we've been able to kind of work around it. Another one that you know, I continue to mull over is that Looker is not really a replacement for a product analytics tool. You know, we are designers and engineers and really folks all across the company would like to better understand like how are our patients navigating a mobile app, like what is the drop-off rate between an appointment booking flow, or you know, how do patients use the chat feature in our app, things like that. There are some specialized tools that are really good at that, and kind of same thing for website, like understanding web traffic. So things like Mixpanel and Heap and Hotjar and others. And yeah, our data system and infrastructure is not really optimized, perhaps yet, for predictive analytics. The vast majority of what we are doing is kind of looking at the past and trying to understand it, and then use that to make predictions about the future. And something else is that the tools are not exactly cheap. Between all of those tools, we were paying in the tens of thousands of dollars and over the course of a year. But the way that we look at it is that these tools are major multipliers for the analysts at Firefly, and also for the rest of the team. We lean on Looker for a lot of workflows. So there's a lot of software that our engineering team just doesn't have to build, because we're able to build workflows around reports in Looker. Okay, and then one note here, just around data modeling. And I talked about this a little bit with DBT, but the kind of a really common way of building your kind of data pipeline for a long time was building ETL, an extract, transform, and load pipeline, where data is you have an engineer that's writing code to extract data from some system, and as part of that extract kind of job, the data is being transformed in some way and then loaded into your data warehouse. With the advent a lot of these kind of more modern transform tools, what a lot of folks are doing is an ELT based system where data is actually just extracted and loaded raw into the database, and then there's kind of a separation between raw data and transformed data. So visualize that here, where in our case, we actually have separate databases in Snowflake. One's called a raw database, one is the analytics database. We are able to cross-join across these databases, but for kind of cleanliness perspective, it makes it really clear to anyone at Firefly, what data is coming from where and why, and where's the source of truth for it. Okay. That is all I've got. Thank you for having me, and I think we have some time for Q&A.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jacob. For if we have any Q&A questions, either because we're a pretty small group, feel free to unmute yourself and join in, or raise your hand with a little reaction, I don't know, thumbs up feature, because we don't have the hands feature in this one. I've got a loaded question if that's easy to help things off. We also just realized that Snowflake plus, we looked at Looker, but I currently have more people who are really good at using Tableau for stuff and haven't seen all the benefits of Looker yet. So they do a lot of things in Tableau, and it does not do product stuff like you mentioned. So we recently started using Hotjar. I have no idea how Hotjar works, besides occasionally I see little pop-ups in the bottom of other websites. What can you tell me why you want something like Hotjar?
Yeah, Hotjar might also have those like the little chat icons. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, but another thing that Hotjar does is that Looker or Tableau does not do is they can help create those kind of those visualizations that show you like a heat map of your website landing pages, or kind of any page on your website, and they can show you, typically how far down the page do folks scroll, where do they move their cursor, what buttons are folks clicking the most. And it is certainly theoretically possible to instrument a bunch of to create that data yourself. But that's one example of something that Hotjar does really well. Like Looker and Tableau, for that matter, are just not really designed for. There are other things like, I don't know if Hotjar actually has a mobile SDK, but for example, Heap and Mixpanel is two of many companies that do this. They identify like what are the common workflows that kind of patterns for how people use your mobile app, and they because they know that they're working with mobile data, they're able to kind of intelligently create analyses that are really targeted towards that use case in a way that if you don't have a tool like that understands the data it's working with and has built a ton of value-added kind of transform kind of steps on top of raw page view data, you end up having to build a good amount of that yourself.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. I'm also going to stop recording in case that gets more people to ask questions, but I see Mohit, I think you've got your hand raised.